Hey, this is Jay.
And this is Chelsea.
Welcome to the Shifting Perceptions podcast.
We are bringing you inspiration to live a more creative lifestyle because our favorite people are the ones that choose the path less traveled.
Guys, we are really excited to bring you our dear friend Bob Mignogna. Bob is an absolute legend in the surfing industry. He followed his intuition as a school teacher in New York City to eventually become the publisher of Surfing Magazine for 25 years. Bob created not only a career, but a legacy, and is currently one of the people responsible for bringing surfing to the Olympics. And did I mention he went to Woodstock?
Hey, Jay. Hey, Chels. How's the kids?
Hi. Oh, my gosh.
Lord.
We're having some
technical issues going on here. Take three.
Oh, man.
So, all right, we'll start.
All right, cool.
Let's start fresh here with good vibes. So,
Yeah.
So Bob, thank you for being our first guest. We're extremely excited to talk to you. I've known you for a long time. We met at a music surf festival, the Alma Surf Festival in Brazil, November 2007, and on one of the first nights there, I didn't really know many people, and I wound up stumbling outside the hotel and came across you and Jim Kempton chatting, and you guys allowed me to join in your conversation, and we've been good buds ever since. And I'm really excited to kind of dive into, your history and some of the stories that you've shared with me in a little deeper level. So,
Wow, I'm really humbled to be invited to be your first guest, never mind just a guest, period. And it has been a really enjoyable 11, 12 years since we first met. Since then, you and Chelsea met and you got married, have three wonderful kids and a burgeoning art career. And I find you also a soothing sort of poet slash mentor slash patient of the world in your musings on your newsletter.
Wow, what an honor.
Yeah, and so I hope we could chat a little bit about that in this conversation too.
Well, that's cool. I'm actually just so excited to be able to talk to you without interruption, because I feel like for the last 5 years, every time we chat, it is interrupted by a whole lot of toddlers. So here we go.
Yeah. Well, I love having the kids in. When I recently saw you about 6 months ago for dinner, it was the first time I met all three kids at once. It was really fun, and I guess I've developed a little special bond with Summer.
Yes, she calls you Uncle Bob. It's awesome.
That's cool. That's great.
Awesome.
So Bob,
let's get into this.
Yeah. So diving into Bob Mignogna, we did a little Google search, and one of the things we came across in a couple different spots was Bob Mignogna, one of the bosses of the surf industry, and we would love to know how you went from a teacher on Long Island to becoming one of the bosses of the surf industry.
Well, as an Italian whose great uncles and great aunts lived on Mulberry Street in Little Italy, I could attribute it to my mob connections, but that would be a big lie.
Yeah.
I think the question can be answered when you look at why Romeo Andreotti, the owner of Alma Surf Magazine and the producer of the surf festival that we met at in Brazil, why he asked me to join the team of judges in the film festival portion. Romeo, being a publisher of a print media himself, knew of my career, 30 years that I spent at Surfing Magazine, 25 of those years as the publisher. I started at the magazine as a photographer in 1973, living on the North Shore of Oahu, having left New York to go find my dream as a surfer. And I wound up taking up surf photography, and that led me to getting offered a job over in California working at the magazine, which I accepted after about 15 months on the North Shore, living the dream. And after about 5 years on the job, I brokered a sale of the magazine from a New York publisher named Adrian Lopez to an Australian named Clyde Packer, who had moved over here, and he wound up buying the magazine. I remember it was $400,000. I should have bought it myself.
Oh my gosh!
But, yeah. And a year later, Clyde made me the associate publisher and then the publisher of the magazine. So until 2003, I was in the media business. The last 10 years of that, we had live event division that was producing surf competitions, started an air show series. We had launched many other magazines. We had sold the company to a New York publishing company. They bought other publishing companies that had magazines they thought fit into my group. And by the time I left in 2003, I was the vice president of operations for the action sports group of media properties that included not only Surfing Magazine, where I started, but Surfer Magazine. We had bought the company that owned our competitor, but skateboarder, snowboarder, bike, powder, climbing, canoe and kayak, surfing girl, bodyboarding. We had a host of youth action sport magazines, as I said, some of which we started, some of which we acquired, and it was a great run. So, the boss moniker, which I remember the article that published that, was in reference to my role in the industry. But when I first started in '73, the surf industry was a mere $50 million a year global business. And during the time I was at the magazines, it had grown to a $25 billion a year global business. And there's a lot of steps, obviously, in between that we can talk about, but and motivations as well. But Romeo was interested in that, and that's how I got the moniker Boss, because I was involved in a lot of the different aspects of the industry and the sport that elevated it from a real cottage industry and small-time sport to kind of what it is today.
That's awesome, Bob. So I feel like we're going to dive into Brazil, and I want to hear more about that. But first, I want to hear, since so much of our audience is coming in to hear how these big jumps happen, but your career had essentially started with all intentions going towards being a teacher, right? So that was where you went
Correct.
to school. So then bring me back to like the frame of mind of Bob as a teacher and moving to Hawaii. So how did that happen?
Okay. Well, I'll take a step back before that. I went to Fordham University in New York and got a degree in international finance. And I was young. I was 20 when I graduated from university, and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And at my father's urging, I went off to graduate school and started working on a teaching master's, which I never completed. And during the time I was working on my master's, I got a job teaching full time at a Catholic elementary school in New York City called St. Rita's, and I taught there for 3 years. And I had been surfing for 7 or 8 years already by this time, and which was the period of 1970, 71, 72, going into 73 when I was teaching. And I'd been influenced by the print media, and in particular, I was strongly influenced by an article written by Drew Kampion, a great surf journalist of the era, and it's a wonderful guy. An article he did on the North Shore and of Oahu, and the surf culture, and as well as the waves and the action, the lifestyle and the action came through loud and clear, and sort of called me. So I decided to give up my teaching career.
So you'd never been to Hawaii before you moved there?
Never been to Hawaii, had no idea where I was going, other than what I read And I had met a guy out surfing in Long Beach, New York, where I primarily surfed every day. I had met a guy named Tom Carroll, not the famous surfer, but a guy I grew up with. I had met him that summer. And Tom had just come back from a winter in Hawaii. And I told him I was going to go to Hawaii. And he said, "Where are you going to stay?" Didn't know. Here's the name of a friend of mine and his address. Go see him and tell him you're my friend, and I'm sure he'll put you up till you get a place on your own. So I literally flew to Hawaii with my luggage, not even a surfboard, and rented a car, drove out to the North Shore, went to this guy's house. I still remember the address today, 58360B Cam Highway, across the street from the Sunset Beach parking lot.
Yeah.
And I pulled up to his house, got out of my car with my piece of luggage, and there was nobody home, but there was a nice 7.4 Owl Chapman gun on the lawn. And so I put my luggage inside his unopened front door, left him a note. "Dear Norbert, I'm Tom Carroll's friend. Hope you don't mind I borrowed your board. I'll be back in a little while." Walked across the street and went out surfing at Kampion. Waves were really fun. Bigger than I was used to, of course, having grown up on Long Island, more powerful than I was used to. Had a great session. Met some guys who have become lifelong friends. Went back to the house, and Norbert was standing at the door, and he greeted me, "Hello, brother Bob." I knew I was in for a fun time.
Wow. So I have to ask some questions here. So the first thing that comes to mind, knowing you as I do, you're like, I consider you as a family man, one of the pillars of Bob Mignogna. You seem like you've always come across to me as a very strong, family-oriented man. And with that being said, was that hard for you to like leave your friends and family in New York to just go somewhere you've never been to before?
Actually, it was hard for my friends and family, although I didn't know that until later on in life. It was really easy for me, and it was rather spontaneous. I probably gave myself a month's notice that I was going to do it, and I was just, consider the era. It was It was August, September 1973. I had been in university 66 to 70 during the height of the protests of the Vietnam War. In 71, 72, 73, soldiers were coming back that weren't being received with a hero's welcome like our soldiers are today, and deservedly so. They were coming back to a hostile environment, especially in the youth world, where we were, almost everybody was unsupportive of the government's actions in Vietnam. And so it was an era where we were dreaming wildly. Just look at the lyrics of the music from the 60s
sure.
and the early 70s. It just opened your mind up to thinking of alternatives. And so one of the objectives I did have an objective when I went to Hawaii. I had two objectives. One was to go surf some really good waves. Two was to live a surfing lifestyle, which was difficult to live on Long Island, certainly from November through May, and when it's freezing cold and snow and the water temperature is 38 degrees. And the third thing was I thought I could always parlay my teaching experience and my salesmanship abilities to get a job teaching somewhere. So that was my fallback. And I had always been a money saver, and I worked through college. I was a commuter at Fordham, so I went home every day, had a job, and I had saved, the equivalent today of a substantial amount of money for a 22-year-old kid. And so I had plenty of money to live on for a year or two and still have money to come home with. And so it was pretty easy for me to let go. Lastly, I was the third of three children. My parents were, born in 1913, 1917. And so in 1928, when the Depression hit, my dad was 15, my mom was 11. My dad had to drop out of college, go to work. And then they had two girls right away who they were strict with. And then they had me, the only boy. And I was pretty much allowed to develop my own sort of objectives and goals and things I wanted to do, even on a day-to-day basis, never mind longer term than that. I was given a lot of freedom that my sisters weren't given. And so I felt no family restraints, even though there were. It didn't bother me. Had no monetary restraints. I had no responsibilities. And the psychology of the era was to go find your dream lifestyle, and that's what I sought out to do.
Well, so that's actually one of the cool things that I always enjoy talking to you about, because I think you're sort of an anomaly in some parts of the surf world, because you have always been very business driven, and yet you have this story of like this hippie that just showed up in Hawaii one day. So it's like a cool balance. I think is pretty cool. But what I really want to hear is, you said you started as a photographer. So when you got out there, how did all of this transfer into like an art way? Like how did the creativity kick in?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest that, there were days in the first couple of months I was living in Hawaii that were just too big for me to serve. Or scared the pants off me when I did serve. And my tolerance for fear is significantly lower than many of the surf heroes that I've come to know over the years. And so I picked up surf photography. I picked up photography, which had been an interest of mine before, but I had never done anything about it. And I said, you know what? I've got to be productive on these days that are gorgeous and the waves are too big for me. And so let me look into this. I saw a photographer shooting pictures one day at sunset and knew from his picture in Surfing Magazine that it was a fellow named Dan Merkel. And I walked up to him and told him who I was. And, I was interested in getting into surf photography. And he said, no problem. Meet me tomorrow at Peter French's house. It was a famous photographer writer for Surfer Magazine over by Rocky. He lived over by Rocky Point. His partner, his roommate, has some camera equipment for sale. I met Dan the next day, bought the camera equipment, and a day or two later, Sunset Beach was just smoking big and really good. And I took photos. On the first day that I took photos, I had them developed a couple of days later and sent them off to Surfing Magazine and Australia's Surfing World Magazine, and they were published. So photos from my very first day that I ever took pictures were published in two surf magazines around the world. So I had a great start. And then I wound up, hustling around on big days, like when Waimea Bay breaking, or which was the primary big wave surf spot of the era. Today, of course, there's many others on the North Shore, and I had photos published from those days. And in the course of doing that, you wind up meeting some of the better surfers in the water because they want to know every photographer on the beach, and there weren't many in 1973. So I wound up meeting, all of the Jeff Hackmans and Gerry Lopez's, et cetera, et cetera. And I developed a couple of good friends. One, the Australian surf phenom, Michael Peterson, and some East Coast guys came over that winter for the first time, who were friends of mine as well from having traveled the East Coast surfing, and they became standouts. Greg Lohr and Rick Rasmussen specifically. Greg's still a good friend of mine today. Rick, of course, passed away many years ago. And so you wind up getting connected to people, as the surf photographer can only do. You wind up getting connected to the top surfers in a very short period of time. So, that was kind of fun. I'd cruise around the North Shore, go out surfing. I knew the best guys in the lineup. Many of those surfers who are all in their late 50s and early to mid 60s today have remained close friends of mine all of these years. Many of them got positions in the surf industry. So that's how I got started in surf photography. And it played me well because Surfing Magazine asked me to go on a trip to North Carolina and shoot the U.S. Surfing Championships in September of 1974. So a year after I got to Hawaii, and that allowed me to go home for a couple of months, July and August, visit my parents, go down to Hatteras, take photos. I had a lot of photos published from that trip to Hatteras, not only in Surfing Magazine, but Japan Surfing World and Australian Surfing World. Met a lot of other people that became friends for a long time. Some still today, Bobby Owens and Mark Fu, who's passed away since, and many others from that, Jim Cartland, from that trip to Hatteras. It was a great trip. But on the way back to Hawaii, when I was dropping off the film, because of course we shot only film in the 70s, I was dropping off the film to get processed. I didn't even know what the outcome was of the photos that I took. I dropped off the film to get processed, and little did I realize that the guys I met at Surfing Magazine were interviewing me for a job as an ad sales rep. And so I didn't know that. And I went back to Hawaii, and a couple of weeks later, I got a call, and I got offered a job selling advertising at Surfing for $400 a month and 25% commission on anything I could sell.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, well, do you have clients for me to sell to? They said, no, all the clients we have, all the clients we have, your boss has. You have to go find new clients. So I said, so $400 a month and 25% of nothing is $400. is $400 a month. Honestly, it was only $100 a month less than I'd been making as a teacher. I was making like $6,500 a year.
Yeah.
But that's not why I took the job. And that's where the motivation that I expressed to you guys years ago when we first met, that I still feel today, 44 years later, after I arrived here in 74, that motivation is still dominant in my life today and has been all those 44 years. I took the job not for $400 a month and 25% commission of nothing. I took the job because Surfing Magazine had a huge impact on my life by an article written by Drew Kampion that had motivated me to go to Hawaii. And so I felt if I started working at the magazine, somehow I could have an impact on the kids who read the magazine. And I had always had a desire, and I had been looking to fulfill that desire, to work with youth and have a positive impact on them. I like the idea of role models. I know a lot of people who don't like that idea. I do. I had some, including my dad. And so I took the magazine position because I thought I could some way influence kids who read the magazine. That motivation stretched over the 44 years to, being involved in launching a number of nonprofit organizations that deal with youth surfing, being on the board of many other surf organizations. I've been on the board of every competitive surfing organization in the U.S. of any prominence over the last since 1978, so over the last 40 years. And that also then parlayed into a similar interest in environmental messaging and work. And I've been on an environmental board for 20-something years, and I'm also been working with Surfrider for 35 years. So that whole motivation thing is real important to me, and still is. And when people are looking at, what lifestyle, what job, what career, where do I live, that whole thing that Chelsea, you said, interested you in people that find alternative paths. For me, it wasn't what was going to be the job. It was going to be, how am I going to fulfill this kind of spiritual desire I have to help kids? I wanted to join the Peace Corps. My dad wouldn't let me. That was in 1969. It was only a couple of years old. It formed in 66, I think, or 64, 5. And I wound up teaching, and that was very rewarding. I'm still friends with one of my students from the 5th grade class I taught in 1971. Wow. Yeah. And she has great things to say about and so do her parents, who are still alive and friends of mine. They have great things to say about the effect I had on their daughter 46, 47 years ago. And then I was able to live out that dream of helping kids through all the years I've been in the surf industry.
I've got there's so many things to launch off from on what you just talked about. One of the first things that I really would love to know about is what specifically was in this life-changing article that you read. You said it was Drew Campy. Is that his name?
Yeah.
And so what exactly was in that article that motivated you this much? And also as a follow-up, have you gotten did you get a chance to work with him in the magazine industry after you moved to Hawaii?
So what was in that article, and to put this in the context of my mind set at the time, and I don't think I ever shared this with you, but I went to Woodstock.
Oh my God! What? Are you kidding?
No wonder you joined the Peace Corps.
As if I wasn't envious of you enough.
Yeah, I was at Woodstock 2 days before.
Of course you were.
I'm always early at every meeting and every event, and I was there till Tuesday, the day after the closing day, when Jimi Hendrix did his early morning Star Spangled Banner rendition, and I'm still in contact with 2 of the guys. I went with 5 other guys. One's gone. 4 others are alive. 2 of them I'm still in contact with today. One is a newspaper writer for the New York Daily News. He's got a column called The Mighty Quinn, and the other guy is in the is in the marijuana business legally.
Okay.
Wow.
Legally, and he's been trying to get me to invest because he says he's doing really, really well. I won't tell you his name though.
You can tell us off recording.
In case it's not as legal as he said. Anyway, so consider the frame of mind that I was in 1969 when I went to Woodstock in early August of '69. I was 18 years old. I was going into my senior year of college. I turned 19 at the end of August, just after Woodstock and just before senior year started. So I was 19 years old as a senior in college, and having just gone to Woodstock. And the article that Drew Kampion wrote that motivated me or inspired me and motivated me to move to Hawaii was, his words were key, but I can't recall his words. I'd have to pull a magazine up and reread it. But there was a photograph, okay, which he took in the article, it was a full-page shot of Billy Hamilton, Dick Brewer, and Barry Kanayapuni, one of my surf heroes, the latter, Barry Kanayapuni. I have his picture on my wall. And a little baby running around naked in front of the Country Surfboard's sort of wooden shack headquarters. And it just was the ultimate hippie, cool looking life that these guys were leading. And they were surfing Sunset Beach and Velzeland and Rocky Point and Pipeline. So it was like, it was my whole dream, my whole two worlds, surfing and I'll call it the Woodstock world, the Woodstock generation world, all wrapped up in one. And it just spoke to me, obviously, pretty loud and clear.
Wow.
And yes, so I started at the magazine in 74, full-time. I'd been a photographer for a year from 73 to 74. Shortly after I got there, Drew Kampion left his position at Surfer magazine, and the editor of Surfing magazine hired Drew to write for our magazine. And so Drew and I not only got to work together, but he and his wife Susan and I became friends because I would go over their house. We both had a taste for fine red wine, as you guys know.
Yes.
And and Drew was a connoisseur then in 75, 76, 77. Today, Drew lives and he has for many years, on Whidbey Island in the Pacific Northwest, which is sort of an enclave of wealthy and non-wealthy hippies from the 60s and 70s. A lot of them very successful journalists and writers, photographers, artists, painters, yada yada yada. And he runs a sort of Craigslist of Whidbey Island that has a business enterprise there, and he has a long list of people on social media that he sends a daily quote from Walt Whitman to.
No way. That's pretty cool. Well,
so I'm still in touch with him.
So when you got that official job, did you have to leave Hawaii, or did you stay in Hawaii for a while longer after that?
Well, they offered me the job, and it required me to come within about 2 weeks. Interestingly, I didn't know I was going to get that offer. When I went back to Hawaii in September of 74 after that assignment to Cape Hatteras, where I shot photos for the magazine, and then I came back to Hawaii and stopped in Southern California to drop off the film, I figured, that bank account is starting to get down. I better, I had not worked for a year. I had just surfed and shot surf photos for a year. It was a great year. And I better start thinking about a job. And so I saw an ad in Rolling Stone magazine in the back where they had classifieds for people with with degrees from American universities to teach history, which was one of the subjects I taught in New Zealand. And when I contacted them, I contacted the New Zealand consulate in Honolulu. The job was, if I got it, would have given me a 10-acre piece of farmland, a home on the 10 acres that they would pay rent for. And if I stayed for 3 years working, the home would be mine.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And so I was in the application and interview cycle with the New Zealand consulate in Honolulu for the position when I got the call from Surfing magazine. And there was a secondary draw to taking that job besides the opportunity to affect kids, and that was that I'd only be, a 6-hour plane flight from my parents in New York rather than a 15 to 20-hour plane flight. And so I was like, okay, let me, the first time I really had to weigh options, and I chose to come to California. So when I accepted the position, I can't recall exactly, but I think I had about 2 weeks to get here. I got here on a Friday. I had $2,300 left in my bank account, which would be the equivalent of about $25,000 today. I had $2,300 left in my bank account. A friend of mine met me at the airport, drove me to South Laguna. The magazine's office was nearby. This was on a Friday afternoon. I went into a real estate office, found an apartment in a home overlooking the ocean in South Laguna for $165 a month rent. I had to put first
my God.
I had to put first and last with a $10 cleaning deposit. That's $350. I had nothing. I got the apartment that day, moved in. It was empty. The next morning, that same friend drove me to the Orange County Fairgrounds where there was the weekend swap meet. I bought a bed, bedding materials like sheets and pillows, kitchen utensils, cooking stuff, and on the way out of the swap meet, we stopped at a used car dealership on Beach Boulevard. I bought a used Volkswagen Beetle for about $900 and moved into the apartment and didn't get my first $200 paycheck. Twice a month we got paid at the magazine. Of course, I didn't earn any commissions. I got my first $200 paycheck when I had $1.10 left in my bank account.
Whoa.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
The bank, which was Bank of America, I had moved my money to when I came over from Haya on that Friday, two weeks earlier. The branch vice president, his name was Barbara McAdam.
How do you remember that?
She said, because she was a fan, she said to me, Mr. Mignogna, we have a $3 minimum to keep your savings account open. I said, well, I need to go below that, take my last like $50 out. I said, but I get a paycheck on Friday, and it'll be $200. Trust me, I'll be here with the paycheck. She said, okay. She stayed my banker for about 10 years until she moved on or retired. And we laughed about that story over and over and over again. She said she never, ever did that for anybody, but she could just look in my eyes and knew I was telling her the truth and I was coming in with a paycheck.
So that's such a perfect lead-in, because I think that's one of the coolest things about you, Bob, is that you hold on to people. I actually would love to hear where that comes from. Is that your parents? Was that where does that part of you that meets people and then just keeps them in your life for so long? Where does that come from?
So well too.
And so well, yeah.
It's authentic.
Well, I would have to credit that probably first and foremost with my parents. And I actually have never thought about this, so I'm thinking off the cuff, but it seems pretty obvious that there's two answers. One, my parents kept their social circle of friends for a long time. My dad's friends when he was a teenage boy. Some of them were in his wedding party in 1937 when he and my mom got married. And I wasn't born till 49. I didn't know who these people were probably for 5 to 10 years after I was born. And they were still friends of his. So some of it comes just from that. But where does even that come from? Does that come from his family, his parents and grandparents? I don't know. But I think it's kind of, what does Billy Joel say? It's a New York kind of thing.
Yeah, it's true. Because Jay's family's like that too. Jay's got that in him. Awesome.
When you grow up, I grew up in an apartment building for 10 years in the city. When you grow up in an apartment building, your neighbors are really close to you. You hear them cough, and you hear them arguing. You see them all the time in the hallway. they become your godparents, and your parents become their kids' godparents. You buy each other. Our apartment building had Jewish and Catholic people in it. So on Saturdays, our Jewish friends would bring us bagels and fresh pastries, and on Sunday we would bring them fresh pastries, because after they would go to the temple on Saturdays, they would go out and, get pastries, and after we would go to church on Sundays, we would go out and get pastries, and share. And you had a fire escape, and fire escapes usually were shared by two different apartments, so they didn't have to build that many fire escapes. And so if you in fire, whatever window you had on your fire escape, which was often the kitchen, and certainly that was it for us. The kitchen window's always open because you were cooking in the kitchen. We didn't have fans above the stove, so it was the only place that the smoke could escape. And your neighbor's kitchen window was open, and so people were always leaning out the window to talk to each other in their kitchen, from kitchen window to kitchen window. So, you develop bonds that one of the rubs against West Coast people when I was a kid and when I moved out here was that everybody lives distinctive lifestyles from their neighbors. And when I first came out here and dropped off that film, they drove me from LA Airport to Orange County, where the magazine was located. And I was like, what are all these homes have walls up? Entire neighborhoods had walls up. And they said, well, that's how people live here, and the magazine's office was in Laguna Niguel, which was a newer community. And there were walls between the homes and the main roads. So you didn't even know what the front door looked like. And I used to attribute that to, well, it was the Wild West at one time. People came out here to pan for gold, right. And they wanted to screw their neighbor. They didn't want their neighbor to get their piece of the creek where they were getting their gold. So that was how I sort of surmised West Coast lifestyle versus East. But I am, and as you get older, I'm a lot older than you guys. You can keep your friends for a long time, but the ones that are really close to you, that know what's really going on in your life, that pool of people narrows down to number one, your family, and which could be big or small, and number two, a few close friends.
I gotta say, Bob, like I mentioned earlier, since I met you, it seemed, I don't know, I feel like we have like a cosmic connection, and you've always felt more like family to me. And I gotta admit, I never was a surf industry groupie growing up. I used to look in the mags and stuff, but I never had access to all the videos or all the cool stuff growing up. It wasn't as fun to me as just going out surfing. So my intrigue and my interest and my enjoyment of spending time with you always involved more around Bob Mignogna, the person. And I guess it's attributed to the family orientation that you just described, and your sense of community, still is a huge part of your personality. And I got to ask you, so earlier you mentioned having a really strong spiritual connection to wanting to contribute and give back. And that's a really important thing for us as well. Me being an artist is certainly not the most logical pursuit to financial abundance, let's say. But I do art because it contributes and it inspires, hopefully, people. And it's something that I feel a passion to do. And the same with this podcast, I want to inspire, contribute, and give back. And that's Chelsea and my motivation. So is there some background with spirituality or any practices that you still have that you feel center you and motivate you to do these things?
Sure. Yeah. It's pretty simple in that regard. And that is, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, as being the Son of God and died on the cross to save, my soul and is my pathway to heaven. And that came to me, clearly through my parents who were devout Catholics. I still, I not only went to Catholic elementary school, 2 of them. I went to a Jesuit university. I went to a Catholic graduate school, and I taught in a Catholic school for 3 years. And so until I was 23 and moved to Hawaii, all of my education, both where I was being taught and where I was the teacher, were in Catholic institutions. I was an altar boy as a kid, and I've kept those beliefs strong still to today, regardless of the politics or the social problems within the Catholic Church, or regardless of other movements like the evangelical Christian movement that my children actually subscribe to. I've stayed on a steady course of being a Catholic all these years. How that relates to my interest in helping youth, I'm sure at the core, the very deepest core, Catholicism is a socially democratic institution. At least its teachings are. There are obviously practitioners, many of them of the faith, who aren't that way, including many of the clergy. But at its core, we're all in this together. It's not me against you, and I've always believed that. In having financial goals, it can be in sync with that, or it can be at odds with that, or it can actually have no impact on how you satisfy your spiritual needs, and actually bring those to your day-to-day work life too. And by that I mean, and I'm saying this seriously, and sometimes I question whether I did the right thing. As a 69-year-old guy now, I go, you do the right thing. And then I come back and go, yes, you did. I have never had financial goals. I've never, other than maybe when I was in high school and college, and I had part-time jobs, and I wanted to save. Apparently, I must have known somewhere I was going to take off and need money to live for a year without working. But I said that a little facetiously. But ever since, I've never had financial goals. I've never said that I want to have this much money, and financial concerns have rarely, although they've rarely been the break it or make it in my decision-making process. Certainly not about my job or career. Maybe about whether I sold a home or didn't sell a home. I've acted more on my the goals are to stay true to my love of the Lord, to focus on my kids, my children, now my grandchildren too, my relationships with them, make sure that, they know who their father really is and what really matters to their father. And I give them the opportunity to use that or not use that, depending on how they want to live their lives, and do good for the community that I'm working in. And so I started working in the surf community, and so I've tried to do a lot of good in the surf community.
So that actually leads right into a question that Jay and I both wanted to ask you, that I love the question, like, what does making it look like for you? But I think for you, I want to hear how that's changed through the years. Like, what is success in your eyes?
Well, success in my eyes, and I've told my children this, is knowing that, and continuing to know that my children love God. That was one of my primary goal as a parent, was teach them about the Lord. And my kids tell me all the time, Dad, you succeeded. Okay, so I almost could end right there and say that's it. Okay, I could go to my grave feeling pretty good about myself. Okay, but I can't end it right there, because as you get older, your earning power, unless you're a guru in a wealthy marketplace, your earning power declines. And the surf industry, as big as it's become, is not a wealthy marketplace. And although I've had a very successful 15-year career in the consulting practice, consulting primarily with surf industry companies, doing management, business management, consulting, and other things, it's not as lucrative as my last 10 years in working for public company in the media world. And so you have to figure out, how do you want to live your last X number of years, which you don't know how many there are. So, and so it takes some financial resources, especially in the event that you live a lot longer. And what if you need certain kind of care that costs money? You don't want to burden your children. So there has been a secondary sort of motivation that answers your question of what's it to be successful. I need to make sure that I'm able to take care of myself and live the way I want to live, and I have the resources to do that, and I don't burden my children with that from a financial point of view. So I would throw that in the mix. There are a couple of other things. One in particular that I'm sort of bearing my soul, but quite honestly, you two guys have what connected me with you guys, especially Jay back in 2007, was there was something that just made me feel soulfully, instantly connected to Jay, and willing to be open and honest with him, and he in return, and from the get-go, and that's not anything that I can pinpoint and say it was because of this or because of that. That's just the way we were made up in our mental chemistry and our spirit, our soul, and so on and so forth. But I've been divorced 24 years now, and I'm still interested in having a permanent relationship with a woman. I've not had one since. I've tried, and so there's a little bit of me that wants to accomplish that. I've convinced myself I will not put the term success or failure on whether that happens or not, because some part of it's out of my control. Me loving God and me teaching my kids, that was a lot more in my control than finding a woman who could put up with me. Although I have one in mind, and she knows it, and she lives in New York.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and I told you guys this. And I know we both look forward to that happening from the point of view of we can get to see each other, and then I want to be able to continue to surf physically, as long as I can in my life. And so is it going to be a failure if my last 10 years on earth I'm unable to surf? No, but I still aim at that. I'm at the gym every day that I don't surf.
Well, so that actually brings us, I think just because I don't know which organizations you're a part of right now and all of that, but I want to hear what is a day in your world right now, Bob? So I know you were working with the Olympic organization. What things are you doing right now? What are the current goals?
Well, currently, I'm involved with 6 nonprofits. I'm on the board. I'm the senior advisor to the Surf Industry Manufacturers Association, which I helped found 28, 30 years ago, called SEMA. I'm a voting board of director for the SEMA Environmental Fund since it launched 22 years ago. I'm on the board of directors of the East Coast Surfing Hall of Fame, which is right now being run from New Jersey. I'm the senior advisor to the International Surfing Association, which I worked for 5 years full time over the last 15 years, running the organization, and it's the organization that lobbied for and achieved Olympic surfing, and will run the Olympic surfing event in Tokyo 2020. I'm a senior advisor to that organization.
So is that official, by the way? Is that happening?
Yeah, surfing's in the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. It's the only Olympics right now that it's in. It's still working to get into the 2024 Paris Games and then the 2028 LA Games. But hopefully a more permanent status for surfing is voted in over the next 3 or 4 years, and it doesn't have to sort of fight for a position in each successive Summer Olympic Games. But in June, July of 2017, the Olympic Committee voted surfing into the Tokyo 2020 Games.
Wow, that's exciting.
It is pretty exciting. And so I'm the only senior advisor to the board of that organization. And then the last 2 that I'm involved with is I co-founded the San Onofre Parks Foundation, which funds all the educational and interpretive programs for San Onofre State Park. And I currently chair a committee for the board. And then lastly, I've been on the advisory board of Surfrider Foundation, which I know you guys are involved in.
Yeah.
I've been on the advisory board since it launched 34 years ago. And in the last 2 years, they elevated my role to senior advisor. I'm the only one, and I work directly between Surfrider and surf industry brands, which is a sweet spot for me in helping Surfrider get better connected to the brands. So part of every day is dealing with something to do with all 6 of the nonprofits I'm involved in, and then I have 2 clients in my business management consulting practice that I've had for a long time, and I do some kind of work with every day. One is a longtime client called Wax Research, makes the sticky bumps, surf wax, and accessories, and they've been a client for about 8 years. And then Fortress Eyewear, which makes sunglasses and goggles under the Kratom and Crush Eyes labels, and so I'm very involved with them, probably 10 to 12 hours a week as a consultant. So my day usually starts out going surfing or to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, and come online and when I get home and go through Wall Street Journal, LA Times, New York Times, and Orange County Register, as well as CNN.com and FoxNews.com. Scan them all, read anything that I think is important for me to know. Check out the local news on SanClementeTimes.com, and take a shower and start working if I'm home, a leisurely pace. If I have to visit clients, it's not such a leisurely pace.
Yeah. God, there's so many questions I have for you.
I know. We could go in so many directions.
Something I keep wanting to talk about is just the fact of how you've been so seemingly intuitively willing to pivot constantly throughout your life. It seems to be like a pattern. Like you went from, oh, I'm going to be a teacher. Oh, no, I'm going to travel to Hawaii. Then, oh, no, I'm going to be a surf photographer. Oh, no, I'm going to be a sales guy. Oh, I'm going to be a media guy. I'm going to be a business guy. You've pivoted so many times. Was that something that just came natural to you? And I'm asking because so many people that I interact with, whether it's at an art show or just friends of mine, have these passions or interests or hobbies that they think they're too old, they're too young, it's too late, it's too early. There's a reason they're not just trying these other things. And you seem to always have been willing and able to just be like, oh, I'll just try that now. And how'd that come about? And what kind of advice could you give for people wanting to follow in that?
Well, it's a great question, and I've honestly not sat and consciously thought about the pivots and what that means about me. But I have put my life in that regard into context and been able to sort of summarize it and give advice to other people. I'm called on. For whatever reason, often by especially young people between the ages of 18 and 25, to have a lunch with them and talk to them about the path they're going on. And I seem to have maybe there's a website for those people to go to, and they go, yeah, call Bob Mignogna.
Yeah.
What I tell people is I could just tell you why I did what I did, and it wasn't for this reason or that reason, or it wasn't for money. It wasn't, for people say, oh, you took the job for your lifestyle. No, I didn't. I didn't like Southern California. I thought it was too busy. All the walls around the houses. I didn't want to come here. I was on my way to New Zealand to get 10 acres of pasture. I tell them, I'm just going to tell you what worked for me, and then I'm going to make a few comments about that. This is what I tell kids. What worked for me is, what does your heart tell you all the time that you love? It's saying something to you. Some kids might say, they just all I know is I love playing basketball. Okay. Some people say I love drawing. Okay. I said I love working with young people. I love doing things that are going to make young people's lives better, because I was a young person, and the only way I got to make my life better, because a lot of other people didn't think that way when I was a young kid. Although there were some Little League coaches and Boy Scout leaders, I had to go make my life better. Well, that doesn't always work for a lot of people. So maybe I can help make their lives better in a bigger way. Magazine reached 50,000 kids a month, every other month at the time I took the job. That was a lot more kids than I had ever thought of reaching, teaching school with a class of 35, 40 kids. And so I tell them, just listen to your heart. It speaks to you. If your heart's not speaking to you, or rather, if you don't hear your heart speaking to you, you need some alone time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Okay? You need to go to church, which is part of my alone time. You need to go to the mountains and sit on a cliff, hike, camp. Go someplace where you don't have all the noise of your family, your friends, the radio, the TV today, social media, so on and so forth. Because your heart's got something to say to you, even at 18, 20 years old. You're just not giving it the time to penetrate your brain. So go listen to your heart and follow your heart. Now, your heart may appear to you as your instincts. Follow your instincts. Okay. Now, that's what I did. And so to answer your earlier question, Chelsea, I never even thought really deeply about the pivots. And even today, I have 8 or 8 clients I work with every day. And so I'm constantly pivoting. I only have 3 email addresses, so I get 5 clients on 1 email address. And I answer them all promptly, okay? Whether I'm in the office or out of the office, on my computer or on my phone, I have no problem. I'm one of those people who can give a quality effort to a lot of different things at the same time. But I tell those kids, when I say listen to your heart, listen to your instincts, follow your instincts, I tell them, you know, sometimes that can be tough on relationships. Okay? Because what you're doing is you're giving full consideration to yourself. Okay? And, you know, that's not how some of the most important relationships work. Certainly not the one with God, if you know, whoever your God is. Certainly not my God. And certainly not with a woman or a man that you want to share an intimate, close, and permanent relationship with. And so, you know, you do need to take those things into consideration, as you guys know. Mm-hmm. But you know, and so, but if you're not hearing your heart or following your instinct in the first place, the chances of you winding up, you know, someplace with a partner or without a partner, you know, that is very, very fulfilling to you, the chances are slim.
I like that. I mean, I think Jay and I both had, you know, obviously I used to joke that I was like the other wife to Art, because I think Jay has a very deep relationship with Art, but over the recent years, it's now been the same way with me being a doula, that, you know, we make space, but I think there's room to find both. Well, I know that there's room to find both, with that sort of being super passionate and listening to your voice, but also considering those priorities, you know?
Yep. Yeah, well, I agree. That's why I'm still on the search for a woman. I'm sure I can make it work. I'm wiser.
I'm going to put that in the show note. The first line in our show notes, Bob, is going to be single. Listen, we're going to have this, your first dating ad that we're going to put out there.
Yeah. I also get called into 1-hour lunches with young couples who are either just getting married or just about to have their first baby. They're just getting married. Sometimes they're women. They're just about to have the first baby. It's almost always a guy.
Yeah.
That I wind up talking to. Yeah. and essentially, I give them the same advice, which is has to do with you're marrying, or you married your wife, not your baby. You didn't even have it when you got married. And in 18 years, your baby's going to step out, if they haven't already stepped out. Your baby's going to step out, go to college, and be gone at least 8 or 9 months out of the year, if not 12. And so, in my opinion, your primary relationship is the one between the two people and the two adults in the relationship. And while that doesn't mean you can't pay more attention on any given day or moment, I bet to you know, the kids that you're having, what I'm saying is that those kids aren't yours, the husbands or the wives. They're yours jointly. And so you guys are a team, and teammates take care of each other, and make sure you're primarily taking care of your partner and their needs, and that you're not letting them grow distant because you're preoccupied with, your career, your avocation, or your kids.
Yeah. A big
and,
chapter change, I think, too. I mean, as you know, Jay and I got a crash course in that, so it was, pretty insane.
Man, talking about like pivoting and listening to your voice, like what I think about is it took me like a really long time to have confidence in listening to my voice. Like I get people, a lot of artists approaching me or talking to me, and they're like, they think it was just always easy for me or always intuitive for me to just become an artist. And they didn't realize like it wasn't until my early 30s that I actually had enough courage to listen to my voice and do the thing I've always wanted to do. Like I've always wanted to be a painter, but it wasn't until I finally told myself and the universe, like, this is what I'm going to do. All of a sudden things started happening. And like, I think it's really hard for a lot of people to listen to that voice. And when I did that, that was basically what got me down to Brazil. And so when we were in Brazil together, that was like my crash course at like, being around this other side of the velvet rope, so to say. And you've kind of been like living that life all along. And like, I would love to know like what it was like for you. Like, was it like a wow moment when you first went to Hawaii and you're like hanging out with like all the, Mark Richards and Sean Thompson and PT and all these guys? What was it as big of a deal to you then as like, let's say me being in Brazil with all these musicians was for me? Or was it just like a nonchalant, like, yeah, no big deal? Like,
I'd be lying to say that there wasn't a little bit of, wow, here I am in Hawaii, living the life. But I've never been overly impressed by the stature of successful people, however you define success. Prior to when I finally met them, I've been intimidated in situations. I can clearly remember, being in at a round table in Lausanne, Switzerland, with heads of government, heads of state that were on the Olympic Committee. And we're talking about setting up a specialty event, and I was on this committee, and I'm like, the minute I open my mouth, I'm going to say something dumb, because these people they're all Oxford scholars, literally sons and daughters of kings and queens who had titles themselves. In a couple of cases, the sister of King Hussein from Jordan. She was the president of the International Equestrian Federation and married to the king of Dubai. And so I was intimidated, but I've never been enamored, wowed.
Yeah.
By meeting like a baseball player on a pro team, or in the case of the surfers I met in the early 70s, it was more, we're all people, we're guys. I think that's part of my we're all in this together, philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone's just like human when it comes down to it. It is pretty weird to get past that part of life where you suddenly realize we're all on the same playing field.
I think I'm more enamored by like talent. Like, obviously everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time, but like, I remember like one of the concerts that like I was most floored by was when I saw Jimmy Page and Robert Plant play a concert. And I remember like leading up to the show starting, everyone was freaking out and being annoying and like splashing beer on me. And I was like, oh my God, you guys are so annoying. And then all of a sudden, like the first riff of the guitar came on and it felt like I was in front of God, you know what I mean? Like, and I feel like even though they're just people, like for instance, when we were in Brazil, those were some of my favorite musicians. And even though I know they were just dudes, like I love their music. And there was just something about that trip. And tell me if you got any of this also. They just seemed like a really magical, soulful, cool trip.
Well, yes, it was, but and I felt the same way. But be perfectly honest with you, I had prior to that many magical, soulful,
Right.
Yeah.
experiences.
Your whole life.
And, when Big Wednesday was about to premiere, I think it was '78. I went and had a private showing by John Milius, who was the writer director of the movie, and that led to a party at my house shortly after the premiere, and William Catt, star actor, and Gary Busey, as well as PT the double, and a few other guys. Greg McGillivray, who had shot a lot of the footage from the water for the movie. They were all at my house at my party.
Wow.
I had a little 2-bedroom apartment on top of a house in South Laguna. In moving forward in the years that the surf industry was developing and Quicksilver and Gotcha were hotter than hell, and the new thing was plaid was back. I held a plaid party at my house, and all these famous clothing designers from the surf industry at the time, John Stussy, Michael Thompson, Peter Schroff, all of them were at my plaid party, and they all had made custom clothes for the party, and so it just, none of that seemed, it was cool and it was great, and I knew, I was doing something that my neighbor couldn't pull off, or anybody else that worked with me, or that I knew, for that matter, could pull off. But it and so it was special in that regard. But it was just the role I filled. I was the publisher of Surfing Magazine. I knew everybody in the industry of consequence. I knew all the top surfers. They all came through my office all the time. I went surfing with the Gerry Lopez's and Sean Thompsons of the world. It was that was the way my life was.
That's unreal.
About it.
Did you at any point think, when you were younger, that you might pursue pro surfing with being around all these people? I would imagine they would give you pointers and you're learning from them and watching how they take off on a wave. Like, you must have learned so much from them. Was there a point you wanted to follow that?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I never progressed better than what I would call a C+ surfer in my entire life. My heyday wasn't when I was in Hawaii. That's when I learned to deal with waves of greater consequence. My heyday was probably when I was 45 to 50. And I'd been surfing since I was 15, so 30 years. But I was surfing repetitively at lower trestles on all the best and bigger swells every day, literally. And I was at the top of the peak with 6 or 10 other guys, and I was able to get the waves I wanted. And people from the surf business that came to surf there would have to sit inside of me, not outside of me. And they would tell me over those years that, I can't believe the waves you got this morning, man. They were great. So that was the peak of my career. And then I would say I was a C+ surfer. Keep in mind, I hang around with A+ surfers my last 44 years.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm judging myself to. Just 2 weeks ago, Nick Carroll, the older brother of two-time world champ Tom Carroll, and a phenomenal surfer his entire career himself, as the Australian Junior Boys champion in 1981. Nick Carroll was here for 10 days in California and stayed with me all the days he was in Orange County. So for 5 days, I had what I consider the best 59-year-old surfer in the world. And he still is unbelievable how this guy surfs. I had him staying with me talking surf talk 24 hours a day for 5 days. So
what kind of stuff? What kind of stuff would you even ask someone like that? By that point, you know all the stories. You like, what would you even ask or talk to someone at these levels? Like when you're like hanging out with these legends, people that I watched and looked in magazines or in books, or people that I worshipped when I was younger. Like, what would you even talk about by this point?
Well, similar kinds of things that we've talked about over the years, only an updated conversation. What are the best surfers in the world on the Pro Tour? What are they riding? What are they riding outside of it? What do they think of the wave pool? He was here to cover the wave pool event for Surfline and an online media in Australia. He had already been there and ridden it a couple of times. We had already had those conversations. What were your experiences? Because he stayed with me when he was out here to go ride it back in October last year. So we talked the business. We talked a lot about where pro surfing is going the next couple of years. The guy that's financing it, how much longer is he going to finance? Losing tens of millions of dollars a year. What happens then to pro surfing? And then we talk about the surf industry. He has a keen sense of understanding of the industry and its impact on the sport. But he knows I know a lot more about the industry. I know he knows a lot more about pro surfing. So I'm doing more of the question asking on the pro surfing. He's doing more of the question asking on the global industry and the global business. A lot of talk about the Olympics. And then, I hired him to be editor of Surfing Magazine in 1991. And we worked together and surfed together every day for 8 years. And he moved into a house 3 houses away from me. So we became really close friends as well. We know how to intimidate each other with our knowledge and position on the industry and the sport, but we also know how to be really close friends and be in love with each other and our families and the spiritual side of us and our and the issues that we deal with internally that are big deals to us. We have a lot of conversation of a entirely personal and deep
love that
nature.
Well, so with that said, because this is kind of on topic with that, I think that's actually a question a lot of people want to know. Like, how is this surf culture going to change with all these wave pools? Like that magic of just you have to go to Hawaii.
Yeah, it's like it's a hot topic. I mean, so I grew up in a time where skate parks were already a thing, but they weren't really as fully established. Like I kind of grew up going in backyard half pipes, like if you were lucky, and now they're everywhere. And I imagine surfing is going to take a similar path. And obviously it's a hot topic among surfers. Some people love them, some hate them. What's your take on that?
Well, I've been when you called me the boss man earlier, I've been one of the leaders in many respects. Not the leader, but one of in building the sport. And in all my career at the magazine, it was primarily building the sport domestically, even though the magazine's reach was international. All my time that I devoted to the surf organizations, competition, environmental, whatever, was with the intention of helping to build the sport domestically. One of the results of building anything is you build nice houses, more people are going to buy nice houses. You build the sport, more people are going to participate in that sport. And then when I took the job as director general of the International Surfing Association, the ISA, which was in January 2010, the purpose of an international sports association is to grow the sport internationally. So, the International Amateur Athletic, the IAAF that runs track and field around the world, the International Swimming Federation. You know, all these organizations run the sport in the Olympics too. Their goal is building out the sport so that it affects more lives around the world in a good way, and bridges social divides and political divides and religious divides. Expressly, it's in the IOC's constitution. And any member organization that it gives the title of global governing, world governing body of the sport adopts those precise values and goals. And so, you know, it played right into my hand of wanting to build a sport in America. Now I had the platform to help build the sport globally. And so when you ask the question on the wave pools, it's going to help build the sport. I think it's not going to help kill the sport.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I grew up skating, ramps. And at that time, I remember right before that period of time, it was thought of as almost like, if you're going to get out of chasing backyard ramps and pools and build these skate parks, it almost takes some of the hardcore nature of it away. And I think there's a lot of my friends with surfing, they're like, oh, it's for kooks and blah, blah, blah. But I really think if you're, number one, you're going to empty the lineups in the ocean, which is great. And then if you're able to give access to an activity to people that are landlocked, I think, if you can get some joy from surfing on a board and you're living in Ohio, I think that could only contribute to the world. So I agree.
I'd also love to add that now that we're experiencing a different lifestyle than we used to, where we used to be able to just go to the ocean and sit for 3 hours and wait for the tide to change. Now we enjoy the fact that we could possibly someday find a predictable wave somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not such a bad.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah.
I think from a sport point of view, first of all, is never good for it to take people out of the water on a noticeable basis and reduce the crowds. There'd have to be 200, 300 wave pools around America. That's just not going to happen. Certainly not in my lifetime, nor yours. It's too expensive and to build, and it's too expensive to participate in. And there's no business model yet that's proven to be successful from a consumer point of view. From allowing consumers to the Kelly Slater pool isn't there to make money. It's there. Well, it is, but indirectly, not from consumers paying $30 an hour to ride the wave.
Yeah.
It's there to make money so that if they have 6 or 7 of these around the world, they have a venue to run the competitions in a 2-hour time frame, scheduled TV, be able to sell sponsorships and TV advertising.
Right.
That's the whole business model. And sell live internet subscriptions to the series of events or the individual events. So there's a revenue and a sponsorship model. But I mean, there's a viewer revenue and a sponsorship model. That's why. I think to me, the bigger question is, especially over the next 10 years, what's it going to do to surf competition?
Right.
Because, love it or hate competition, most surfers, even the guys that hate competition, would probably say Kelly Slater's the best surfer in the world. Clearly. Over the last 20 years. Well, Kelly Slater's been principally a competition surfer. He's got 11 world championships. And so competition surfing's success has really helped propel the awareness of the sport and the opinion that even surfers have about who's the best surfers in the world. What's going to happen to competition surfing with the advent of the pool? So today, not a whole lot, because there's one pool that WSL will compete in. That's the one they own and the only Kelly Slater wave pool in the world right now. And it's the one that is in Central California. And so having one event a year there is not going to do much to impact competition surfing. However, they have plans for 4 or 5 more. One they'd like in Japan, one they'd like in Paris, outside of Paris, one they'd like in Florida, and my guess one somewhere else. And it might take 5 or 6 years for all those to come to fruition. Got to have a lot of money, and you got to be willing to plop that money down when there's no business model. But if there was 5 or 6 of them, now the face that the WSO owned, and they were all part of their pro surfing circuit, that changes the face of surfing, because the top surfers who have been surfing in the ocean, have to fully learn how to deal with the pool, which is going to be a different format, and rate different qualities of your surfing, and so that's different. Number one. Number two, there's a possibility, when your twins are 35 years old, that somebody from Chicago who grew up in a wave pool, or I guess somebody from Lemoore, California, who grew up in a wave pool and never surfed the ocean, could be a successful surfer. But anybody who uses that as a reason, or anything like that, as a reason for dissing the pool, is not thinking through the situation. And I don't blame them. They have limited access to be thinking about this. This is stuff that guys like Nick Carroll and I, and even me still today, that we think about all the time.
I mean, I remember as a kid, I used to watch the movie North Shore like over and over and over again. And like, if Rick Kane from Arizona can become a champion, I guess there's a working model out there. I wanted to ask you something that seems like a logical question that someone's going to want to know. So listening to your story, not only the pivots and the spiritual beliefs, but like, it seems to me that like, being willing to make the jump from New York and from as a teacher and a photographer and a businessman and a family man, all these different things. And not to mention like going from New York waves to North Shore Hawaii waves. Like, I got to know, is there anything that makes your palms sweat? Is there anything that keeps you up at night? Does anything make you nervous or scared or intimidated?
Let me think about that for a second. I have a fear when I'm at the top of a ledge.
Okay.
I have fears of dropping in. And the higher the ledge, the greater the fear. Like if I'm in the mountains, and if for some reason I get to the edge of a cliff and it's 1,000-foot drop, 60 degrees, which looks like it's 90 degrees. I'm not crawling. I'm not sitting on the edge like you see some people. not even close. I'm 2 feet back.
I'm worried
that a wind gust is going to blow me. So I have a fear of some heights. I don't have a fear of death, but I have a fear of, is the afterlife going to be as good as I believed all these years it's going to be? The closer you get to it, that thought comes to mind, a couple times a week, to be perfectly honest. Whereas it, came to mind once every 5 years when I was your age. I have a slight fear of an accident to my grandchildren, especially any of them that are participating already in aggressive sports, just because A, accidents will happen, not may.
Right.
B, it may be really bad.
Yeah.
And I have a slight fear. None of these keep me awake at night at all.
Yeah.
I don't even think about them at night. But I have a fear, you know, in waking hours, which causes me to really pay attention. I have a little bit of a fear of terrorism.
Okay.
And these days I have a greater fear than I've ever had of civil strife in our own country that could be violent. And I'll end those thoughts by saying what I do say to myself a lot, and occasionally this brings a couple of tears, is that the world today is nothing like I envisioned the world today would be back in 1968, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, even 74 when I first came to California. The world today is nothing like I envisioned it. And I realized that my vision then, while you can have some impact on it, of course, my vision then was was more a dream. I didn't understand the greedy nature of human beings, nor did I understand how that can play out on a global stage.
Right. Yeah, I wonder how much of that is just because there's more media than we know about it, or if it's just always been like that. It's hard to even know.
Yeah. So, Bob, we could literally go on for probably 5 more hours. So we ask one question before we close up that, we just want to know from everyone. But if we had to, right this minute, place you back in your childhood kitchen, what's the first thing that you think of?
Eating pasta with delicious homemade tomato sauce, meatballs and sausages.
All right. Can you still taste it? I feel like that's a taste that never goes away.
And that same vision has my mother standing in front of the stove with a wooden spoon, stirring it up. Oh yeah, I make her tomato sauce recipes. I don't need it that much.
Does it taste as good?
Well, I think it tastes pretty good if I take the time to make it. It's the whole ordeal is 3 hours, so before you get to eat, so it's a lot of time.
We might have to ask you to make that for us.
Yeah,
if you can make a vegan version when we see you next.
If you're out here and at the house, I'll gladly take the time to do it.
Oh man, that's great. Is there anything else that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to chat about at all before we go?
Yeah, just one last thing.
Yeah.
There were a few things I said there that bared my soul.
Right.
And as I said earlier, I've always found it easy to do that with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to compliment you two guys, and Jay, you in particular, on the way you're not afraid to do that with your audience through your newsletter about your often inability to be creative, to paint, to do things that are inspiring, and how you're learning how to how to accept that, appreciate that in you, and go do some other things that are an important part of your life that you can always divert your attention to, like Chelsea or the kids, or hopefully going surfing more than you probably do.
Yeah.
And because you have to learn to be patient about when that spark is going to hit you again. And the bearing of your soul in your newsletter, I find to be motivational to me, and hopefully encouraging to your readers to think about the kinds of answers to their questions that are some of the same questions you asked me today, and hopefully calming all of that. The ability to release through your newsletter is calming for you.
Yeah. Wow. First of all, like, thanks for even, for reading it and for saying that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that we've always had a strong connection is I think we both have that willingness to be authentic and vulnerable with each other. And I think from the very get-go, we've had that. And we probably also share some similarities. Like, you grew up like in an Italian New York household, and my parents, raised us Jewish, and they're from Brooklyn. So I'm sure there's a lot of values with that. And, combination with that, and, growing up as a creative artist person, I was never like in like the cool crowd. I was never like, overly comfortable in a lot of scenarios that seem to come very natural to you. So for me, part of my motivation with doing the podcast and doing the newsletter, and I've been working on a book, is to help other creative or emotionally charged people trying to get through and find some purpose. And I think, by talking to people like you now and having friends like you, kind of gives some comfort knowing that even the coolest of the cool, like Bob Mignogna, still, it can still, understand that being yourself is really what it all comes down to. Like, none of the popular aspects of your lifestyle, let's say, or the influential people, like, it's all great and fun and good, but really what it comes down to is the friendships. And you've always been one to offer that very generously. And I thank you for that.
Well, thank you guys for allowing me the opportunity to talk to your friends, and I really appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing you guys again as soon as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. And one last question: where do people find you if they want to shoot you an email or reach out?
If you want them to find you.
Yeah, if they want you to find you.
Is there anything you're promoting or you want to share or anything else?
No, there's nothing I'm promoting, but
okay.
They can find me on Instagram under Mignogna1, Mignogna #1. And if they've got something they want to chat about, we can either connect through Messenger or in what's probably going to be a rare case, if somebody wants to talk, we'll try to find the time.
Awesome,
Perfect.
Bob. Thank you so much. Like, I can't tell you how appreciative I am. We're so appreciative and grateful to you, brother.
Thank you, Bob. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you, Bob.
Guys, if you loved hearing Bob's story as much as we did, would you please take a moment and go to iTunes and leave us a review and share with friends? It helps us so much. Also, please go to shiftingperceptionspodcast.com. You can join our newsletter and get updates, or follow us on social media at Shifting Perceptions Podcast. You can see more of my artwork at jalders.com, or follow me on social media at jalders. You can follow my beautiful wife Chelsea on Instagram at Chelsea Alders, or at Mama's Doulas. Thank you again for listening. A lot of love to you guys. Talk to you next week.